Peace and blessings, community. It's great to be back. It's great to be back live with y'all. I want to start off the show by just giving a great shout out to, my community, particularly in the Seattle and Tacoma area, King County and Pierce County, and all across the state of Washington, who are continuing to serve their community. Tonight, I got a very special guest, as all my guests are special, as they're from community. But this one, I got a brother that's coming out of Austin, Texas. And so before I start, I really want to just comment and really talk about something that very impacts, our community, particularly the Black community and BIPOC community, and that was mass incarceration. And as y'all know, the viewers that have been here and the listeners that have been here to my show, and also those who knew, I was formerly incarcerated myself. I went to prison at the age of 17 and was originally sentenced to a 30-year sentence. Ultimately, laws changed. I was able to advocate for myself and advocate for others. And ultimately, my sentence was reduced and I served 18 years on a 30-year sentence. And since I've been out, I've been serving community, particularly helping those individuals who are currently incarcerated get a second look at their particular cases to get free, to get out to their families and friends and community more sooner than later, such as myself. And when I got out here, I came across a coalition of individuals from my community and also allies who really understand that mass incarceration was definitely something that impacted us and harmful, and we've been seeking reform and radical change within this system. And mass incarceration doesn't just impact our community locally, but it impacts it nationally. Earlier this year, I went to a Second Look Summit by the Sentencing Project, and I met a phenomenal brother there that was simply doing the same work, had a similar story such as myself. And that's my guest this evening. So without further ado, I would like to introduce this brother right here, who's an anti-racist, abolitionist community organizer, part of Grassroots Leadership, located out of Austin, Texas. Y'all please give a warm welcome for Mr. Robert Lilly. Peace, brother.
Peace and blessings, kinfolk. Peace and blessings to you.
Again, peace and blessings to you too. Again, it's an honor to have you on my show. I really appreciate you. I remember when I first met you, the vibe was solid. And then when I called back up with you and you was up here in our section, shout out to the People's Institute for Surviving Racism, for Survival and Beyond, and we'd be in circle with you and being
Mary Flowers. Mm-hmm.
Mary Flowers, shout out to Mary Flowers. And so I'm great to have you on the show, brother. And so like I start all shows, I would just simply like for you to just introduce yourself, where you from, and then how you come about doing the work that you're doing today.
All right, man. Thank you very much for that introduction. Peace and blessings to everybody out there that's watching this program. It's about 10:03 in my section of the country. And so it's a little late, but I'm still going to bring genuine energy and vibe to this, right? So a little bit about myself. I was born in New York City in the 1970s, and I was raised in the South Bronx. In my teens, I moved to California. I moved to Westchester and then Inglewood, California. Life became a little more difficult in Inglewood, California. Found myself entering into the gang culture. Eventually, I would find myself incarcerated multiple times as a juvenile. My longest sentence would be between the ages of 15 and 19. I get released at 19, not really have any plan for what my future was going to look like. I had some dreams, but no real way to execute on it because I didn't know how to live as a responsible adult. Found myself soon returning to old behaviors, selling drugs. Ultimately would go to prison again, this time to the feds. After a small stint in the county jail for a TDC, Texas Department of Criminal Justice sentence of 10 years, which, back then in 91, you only did a month for a year. So I did 10 months on a 10-year sentence. But when I got out, I was out for 4 weeks and I was picked up by the feds and I was sent to federal prison from the age of 21 to 30. So as you can see, in a relatively short span of my life, I had multiple stints incarcerated. It was life-changing. It turned my head, and it made me really start thinking like what was happening, because I didn't really understand. All I knew was that in 1991, I was the subject of a federal investigation. What I would later learn is that nationally, crack cocaine had been made public enemy number one, and Black men were being made synonymous with the phenomenon of drug dealing, the, quote unquote, the epidemic, and this war on drugs was now the thing that I was caught up in, and I was damaged. I was collateral damage. My life was collateral damage of this war. So in the midst of me serving that federal time, I began to get motivated to educate myself. And I'm giving you a succinct version of that story. I was able to stop gang banging, or at least back up from the gang culture, because we had a truce in 1992, and that allowed many of us young brothers to put our flags down and look for, as I chose to do, look for solutions. I didn't really want anything else but answers. It was the first time I had a chance to pause and start thinking, what does my life mean? And that was a question that kept dogging me. Suffice it to say, at some point, I began to make some sense of what was happening in the world. Racism was clearly at the heart of what I was experiencing. I began to try to dissect that. Ultimately, this education that I was able to acquire in prison produced in me an appetite for change. I look at myself today as a wounded healer. That's a title from a book by Henry Nouwen, who describes this figure called Messiah, who is identified as the one who's wrapping and unwrapping his bandages very slowly so that he can apply aid to the other person who's wounded. He's a wounded healer. So I consider all the experiences that I've gotten over the course of my lifetime with incarceration to be the thing that gives me empowerment to be an asset to my community today, because this phenomenon is still unfortunately occurring in the lives of too many of our youth, too many of our women, too many of our families. You're on mute, Blaze.
Thank you, brother, for sharing. And one thing that, when we had our discussions and when I'm learning about the work that you're doing is, like you said, the healing aspect to it. We share similar stories in the sense of the war on drugs. There was drug possessions that had caused me to be go to jail when I was a juvenile, and it was used to increase my sentence when I was tried as an adult. And what was unique about the state of Washington is that in 2021, they ruled that our simple possession law was unconstitutional because it criminalized harmless behavior and it exceeded the police power. And so what it did was a lot of us from our community who had these unconstitutional drug possessions were able to come back and get resentenced. And so that's a lot of the work that we're doing out here. But, drilling back in is that, like you said, the rhetoric with the war on drugs, criminalizing us as super predators, and criminalizing, pain, right? And how individuals medicated pain, and how, in our communities, there wasn't rehabilitation or there wasn't resources for individuals to deal with the compounded depravities and harms that were socioeconomic and political in nature, right? And so same thing that was going on all over the country, we ended up getting criminalized and going to prison. And so, it's interesting that the same things went on in your community as they did way up here, with just the policies that disparately impacted us. And so when you talked about healing, it was interesting because I didn't think about the healing aspect or the harm or having to heal until ultimately really like the last couple of years that I got out, and really when I got out, as far as recognizing the harm, that I faced and a lot of my community members face and how we heal. So I would love for you to, when you came into that epiphany, I know that's a through line and a thread to the work that you do, particularly with Grassroots Leadership and also with, Cypher 360 and the youth program that you were sharing with me. So can you just share a little bit about
absolutely
those programs?
Yeah, this, first of all, let me say that's a really important thing for us to center in this conversation. Like, I wouldn't be where I'm at today, and I'm very grateful for the progress that I've made in this very brief moment of time, because I had to experience another incarceration for me to get to where I'm at today. But I count it all gain. And what I'm trying to simply say is that if I had not finally grasped the need for my restoration of my mind, the restoration of my mind and the stilling of my heart through finding peace, I could go on and acquire material things. I could look on the outside as if life was together, but on the inside there was turmoil. I needed to heal. And what that looked for me like in most recent times was me learning to develop an emotional vocabulary. Sounds simple, but it was profound. Learning how to express myself clearly, learning how to identify exactly what was going on internally, and having enough courage to share what I know to be or suspect to be the case internally with somebody externally, a partner, a spouse, a mentor. Hey, I'm feeling depressed. Hey, I feel lonely. Hey, I'm embarrassed. Just being able to own my emotions and not pretend like I'm some Iron Man or some, superhero gangster that doesn't have feelings. The truth is, all of the stuff that I did when I was a young person was a reaction to the instability in my home life as a result of my mother dying when I was a child and my father making grown man decisions that this childish mind couldn't understand, which was he needed a partner to care for his family or to support him in caring for his family. And all I could feel was my own pain. And I didn't know how to tell him, Dad, I don't like the partners you're picking, or they're not treating me well. And so I had to, unfortunately, go through all of these, versions of life trouble and life cycles to get to a place where I just needed to own, Robert, you're hurting. And if you don't deal with this, you're going to continue to cycle inside and outside these prisons, if not die from the drugs you put in your body. And so healing for me is important because I now know today is not the place that they send us to. That's the prison. The real prisons are going on up here in our heads, man.
Sir.
It's the prison of, us believing lies about ourselves, believing lies about the hopes that may not be or may be available for us in the future. And when I finally decided, you know what, my life is important and it's important for me to address my needs because I can't help anybody unless I help myself. I can't I can't give you a drink of water from a cup with a hole in it. So healing is vital to my progress and to my victory today. I've been 6 years abstinent from drugs and alcohol, and I do practice abstinence, although I respect the harm reduction models that exist in many of our communities. For me, abstinence is the only solution because I can't, and under any circumstances, use. That's something I've learned over the course of time. When I was younger, it was my solution, but unfortunately, it was a solution that came at too high a price.
uh, I appreciate it. I really appreciate, your transparency, your vulnerability, and how you share your story. And it's inspiring because we are hurting. A lot of us is hurting as Black men. That's something with, the masculinity and how we survive. That's something
Yeah.
we don't just come into. That's something that we have to be intentional about. So real quick, I just want you to share, like, what was the catalyst or turning point for you to recognize that you were hurting and that it was important that you had to take initiative and find support for your healing journey?
Okay, I'll be succinct. The reality was two things. One, I kept going back to prison and I would have that inevitable moment where I'm laying on a bunk in the county jail and I'm asking myself, what happened? How did this happen? And what I would remember is I was making decisions. I made some decisions. I made very small decisions that accumulated in big consequences. And usually the decisions I was making were in reaction to hurt feelings that I would have because life wasn't going the way I wanted it to go, because somebody hurt my feelings in a relationship, because I had conflict with a peer or or somebody in my life that I valued, and I didn't know how to process that that tension, and so I ran away and I isolated myself, and in my loneliness I felt self-pity, and it overcame me, and I thought the best solution for me was to escape those emotions with alcohol and drugs. So having experienced 4 incarcerations over the course of about 54 years, I started understanding that there was a common denominator in my experiences. Part of it was systemic, but also part of it was internal. Some of the systemic things, it required a greater amount of strength and force and power that I didn't have individually to address. But also the part that I could address, I had a responsibility to address it. I remember reading a book by Bo Lozoff. And in the book, he says that if you identify in your life that you were deprived something as a child. It is, and you're now an adult. It is your responsibility to provide that thing to yourself. So if I wasn't given a hug or a love or, companionship when I was a child, I needed to learn how to do that for myself as an adult. And the book was named "We're All Doing Time" by Bo Lozoff.
We're All Doing Time by Bo Lozoff. Hey, that was a phenomenal, life-changing book for me. And I didn't necessarily know it was Healing Journey, but what it was I found it when I was incarcerated inside the hole,
Mhm.
inside of isolation, right? And
Shout,
really
shout
getting
out
with
to the
yourself.
kindness. Shout out to the Kindness Foundation. Yeah, his
Absolutely.
wife is carrying on his legacy. Powerful book, man.
Absolutely powerful book. And so you talked about the internal journey. Let's briefly talk about, like you said, the systemic issues. And I'm sure grassroots leadership ties into that. And then I definitely want us to go into, sharing the clip about with the documentary that you got going as well. But talk to
Yeah,
me about
yeah.
grassroots leadership for a second.
Well, let me tell you how that came, because it's going back to prison too. I had this ongoing argument with a brother in prison where he would say things like, "Your mother and father taught you right. You're in here because you just didn't obey your parents." And I didn't feel good about his commentary because he was saying it with such confidence. I didn't know how to respond to it reasonably. So I remember just feeling oppressed by his insistence that I was at fault for everything that had occurred in my life. Fortunately for me, I was able to enroll in college when I was in prison. I went to college and I took a sociology class, and I learned the difference between a social problem and a personal problem. And
Yes,
and
sir.
that's when I began to I started finding a language that I could respond to him with. And I realized he was making a lot of assumptions. He assumed I had a mother and father. He assumed my mother and father taught me right from wrong. He assumed I understood what they taught me, and the list went on. And so as I realized that this guy didn't know what he was talking about, he was operating out of this very false narrative. I began to lean into the idea that I was dealing with social problems. When I looked at addiction in my life, addiction wasn't something that, quote unquote, emanated only from me as a personal disease. I saw conditions in my community that lent themselves to my using drugs. And so, if in fact what I was dealing with that brought me to prison was social in nature, then as the sociologist teachings, you know, encourage us, you have to have a social solution to deal with social problems. Hence, I needed to become part of organizations. I had read history and I had learned that no real movement, no real change in our society had ever occurred as a result of just people feeling benevolent and wanting to change things. There was pressure brought to bear on leadership. That was a result of people organizing themselves. And whatever that took to become, I wanted to be it. And so when the door opened up in the early stages of my release, I just started looking for organizations, anything that said reentry, anything that said formerly incarcerated or ex-offended, I was looking for it because I was looking for examples of other men, particularly men, that I could relate to that would show me how to walk that path to become a change agent. I would eventually, after some years, find myself moving to Austin, Texas. I had learned about this organization online, built some relationships via internet, and those relationships eventually would translate into community in real time when I had found myself once again struggling to maintain my sobriety, my recovery, and this community wrapped their arms around me. So I would go to prison again after 15 years out of prison. I would go back to prison for 4 years, but I would have almost 40 people that would surround me with love, support, and resources so that when the door opened up, I walked over a bridge back to community, back to my organization, Grassroots Leadership, where I'm now, an active member of this community, pushing for policy change and practice changes and practices within our government.
Well, it's definitely. And so I want to segue too right into the documentary that you're creating. So you got a powerful voice, right? We know we got a powerful voice, so it's important that we leverage our voice, right? As activists, but also as advocates, right? And what better way than us to, really produce and share our narrative with the world. And so I know you got this documentary that you're working on called Decipher 360 at the moment. And so I would love for us to share this 1 minute clip of that particular documentary.
So for me, it was my mother died, Tony, at 8 years old. And I didn't even, I'm not going to make it lengthy. I just want to say for me, the big thing to crystallize this answer for me is I needed to grieve, and I had no clue on what it meant to grieve. I had no idea, and the people around me didn't know how to grieve. They didn't teach me anything. So here it was, I was dark. I was in darkness. I was in ignorance. I needed to cry. I needed to be able to talk about my feelings, and nobody gave me permission to do that. Nobody gave me guidance and instruction on how to do that. So, I got angry because my mother died. Then I got angry at my dad because I felt my dad didn't protect me, but he was between a rock and a hard spot. So when we did Decipher, the goal was to create a space where we could kind of open up about the stuff that's going on in our lives.
Yeah, that brings back some memories right there. You're on mute. You're still on mute.
Yeah, so real just for a couple minutes, and then before we wrap it up, just share with me, what that was about right there, because it's a healing
All right.
circle, which we know as, and then we want to know how we can support, where you're at with your documentary and getting it out to the world.
All right. So what was beautiful about that scene right there was that everybody in that scene was somebody that I've met along my journey, either prior to going to prison or when I was a young person selling drugs, or they were my enemy on the streets when I was gangbanging. So one of the brothers in there was a Crip from the rolling 60s that we used to bang with each other, bang against each other, almost trying to kill each other. One of the other guys is somebody I put on the hood who spent multiple years. Everybody in that scene spent time in prison. And so what we did, we brought those folk together and we're all on a journey now of restoration. And I think it's important for us to tell this story. The society told the story that they wanted to tell about us as being scourges in our community. We're telling them that that's not our truth, that this is who we are. We're human beings who've been travailing this life, trying to find our way forward with some horrible conditions in opposition to us. And so we brought folk together in Abilene, Texas, where I was doing my program, Decipher 360. And we brought them together at the same center where we used to bring 140 kids together every Monday night. And we just spent that moment talking about what was at the root of a lot of our troubles. And it was a momentous occasion because, what I've learned is that we don't know how much time any of us has. And today somebody could be with us and tomorrow they could be gone. And so I wanted to capture the lives of some of these men who were legends in their community, or everybody in that video clip has made a profound impact in their community, sometimes to the negative, but even in their negativity, there was something good that came out of their lives. So how people can support our project is that we need $10,000 to raise funds for an editor. We have an editor, a woman that's got some credentials out of Canada, that my producer, director, Alicia Taylor, who was a mentee of my mentor, Dr. Jerry Taylor, who's in the clip, but you can't see him. He's to my right. And he was to my left of the screen. And so the goal is to raise $10,000 so that we can successfully complete this project and go back to Abilene, preview it in the new recreation center that they're building in the city, and make an impact on the next generation, because the same forces that were operating against us in the 80s, that operated against us in the 70s, that operated against us in the 60s, they're operating against us in the 2020s. And so we have to create protective forces in our community. And that means educating our people and raising up some leaders, especially from those that were closer to the problem.
Yes, most definitely. We definitely want to support you. We definitely, I'm going to make sure that, I put my social media sites, definitely put up the awareness of how we can help support, raise money for your documentary as well. And so right now, as our viewers can see, we got Decipher 360, the documentary, the ambitious endeavors that he has to, share his and his communities, healing journey with the world. And so if you scan that QR code, go ahead, Robert. I know you got something.
No, scan that QR code. I keep telling them that part right there. Scan that QR code and bless us, man, with your support. But let me mention something about this picture right there. So that brother right there, we call him Pharaoh. His name is Eric Hopkins. Eric Hopkins spent 27 years in prison. I almost cry speaking on this here. So we were locked up together in 2002 to 2006. this was one of my teachers inside the prison, man, from Dallas, Texas. So in the picture that I'm holding up, that's me, a younger version of me, going to visit him. I visited him after I got out for 7 years. He became one of my, my guides in this journey. And like the brothers in Washington created the Black Prisoners Caucus, we were on the road of creating something like that in the prison context, although we didn't have a model for what we were doing. And when I learned about the Black Prisoners Caucus, I was absolutely floored, because I was like, that's what we are, and that's what we can be, not only inside the prison context, but out here in the community. So my goal is not just to create this product to make it entertaining, but it's to use it as a tool, man, to educate my community and to raise up some leaders inside the prison and outside the prison.
Yeah, thank you, brother. I appreciate you seeing this. Shout out to the Black Prisoners Caucus. I'm Black Prisoners Caucus for life. I was Stafford Creek chapter. And, we got a bunch of brothers and sisters that was formerly incarcerated as part of the Black Prisoners Caucus community group as well, who's out here continuing to do the work. And so before we go real quick, where can we find you on social? And then where can we find your website so we can continue to stay connected?
Yeah. So I have a blog on, forget the name of the platform, but I have a blog. It's called Righteous-Redemption, Righteous-Redemption, which is also the name of my business concern, Righteous Redemption LLC. I also you can find me on Facebook under Robert Tyrone Lilly, and you can find me on Instagram. That should be a br.rob, Brother Rob Lilly. So that's my brother, br.roblilly, Brother Rob Lilly. And you can find me on Facebook at Robert Tyrone Lilly.
All right. Thank you, brother. It's a pleasure having you. Man, it's been a pleasure. I'm going to get you back on here again, too.
I'm coming out there to be a part of that big yard barbecue. You better watch. I'm going to bring a whole crew down with me. You watch and see.
Sir. Man. Yes, sir. I look for you have it. And so I appreciate community. I appreciate you spending this evening with us. Whether you're watching it live or you catching it on recording, please like, share, please subscribe to Rainier Avenue Radio. This is Rainier Avenue Radio, Centering Voices with Blaze. I appreciate y'all being here. Peace and blessings, community. And we're out.